Dawson College. That was the last incident that happens in the play, because of course I was at Dawson when that happened. And so I wrote a play about the sort of the effect of these huge events in the world that have on this family in Montreal. So I put the book aside, and then I serendipitously ran into an old friend of mine from elementary school, of course, as these things happen, who had just written her first novel, Susan Doherty. I don't know if any of you know who she is. And I started telling her about my idea for The Birds That Stay, this novel this coming of age Quebec novel, West Island novel. And she said, "Oh, you have to write it right now. You have to go home and write it right now." So I did. I just went home and started writing it basically at that moment, and worked on it for 2 years, and then very fortunately found a publisher pretty quickly. But I also knew that I wanted to actually sell this book because, coming of age novels set in Quebec by first-time Canadian authors at the age of 60 are not exactly selling like hotcakes. They're not, this is not something that they're not flying off the shelves. So I decided I'd make it a murder mystery because I know that they sell more. And I like to read murder mysteries, actually. I'm a fan of them. And there was an act of violence sort of at the heart of the story in the original story anyway. So it didn't seem like that big a step for me then to move on to a murder mystery. Once I got myself into that mystery, though, it started to take on a life of its own. And those of you who've read the book, the whole plot about going back to World War II was not part of the original story. It was a sort of aspect of Canadian history that I didn't know about former Nazis who got into Canada on this thing called this sort of funnel into Canada called the Rat Line. I knew nothing about that. I knew nothing about our sordid history with that. And so that became one of the plot lines in The Birds That Stay. So so I decided with The Birds That Stay there were several stories and themes and ideas that I wanted to pursue. And so I came up with my main character, Marie Russell, who is in the first book, a 59-year-old Dawson College teacher of, I couldn't make her an English teacher, that was too close. So I made her a marine biologist, which is because I am a very, very amateur naturalist. I have an abiding passion for every part of the animal kingdom, human and non-human. And so that just gave me a great opportunity to research things I'm really interested in and write about them. So her counterpart, my detective, is Romeo Leduc, who's the head of homicide for the Saint-Jérôme district. And so in The Birds That Stay, after about, I think it's well over 100 pages of them kind of circling each other, they finally sort of find each other and coming together to solve this mystery. I thought maybe what I do is I just sort of contextualize the books a bit and read from them a little bit, if you would appreciate that. And then if you want to ask me questions at the end, that's completely fine with me. So in The Birds That Stay, there's several plot lines, and one, of course, is Marie having to put her aging mother in a home. The other one, of course, is the death of Anna Newman, this older woman at the very beginning of the book, and who on earth would go out in the middle of St. Lucie des Laurentides, which is about 20 minutes from here, and murder an old lady in her garden. And then the other plot line, well, that they're all kind of connected to the murder of Anna Newman. And if you haven't read the book, I can't really talk about them more because it would completely ruin it for you. But I thought I would just start with from The Birds That Stay. Maybe I thought I'd just read the first chapter. Is that okay? Great. So people often ask me, if the characters are people I know. Are they, is it completely autobiographical? Are these just people from my life? And yes, of course they are. Some of them are. This particular opening character is definitely, and people who live around St. Lucie recognize him. But by the same token, all these characters are fictional. Obviously, they're all composites of people, but some are more, let's say, recognizable. Monsieur Lachance in the book is, and some of you probably know Joe and Sheila, who are very recognizable in The Birds That Stay as Joel and Shelley. They don't really come back in the second book so much, but they'll be back in the third book. So, okay. So this is chapter 1. And you may recognize this character as well. Louis Lachance eased into the driver's seat of the ancient Toyota pickup and turned the key, grateful that he'd had the muffler replaced a week earlier. He had a little job to see to that morning, but he had to escape his house undetected first. The engine sputtered to life, and the tires crunched along the gravel driveway as slowly as a hearse. He felt quite safe that Michelle was still asleep, her mouth slightly open, snoring like a man. If he was lucky, he would be done and back home before she woke up. Louis Lachance was a retired homme à tout faire, except retirement had been Michelle's idea, not his. He still loved driving the dirt roads he knew like old friends and working for the few customers who really counted on him year in, year out. He closed down houses for the winter and opened them up again in the spring for les Anglais from the city. He fixed pipes burst by early freezes, replaced locks with lost keys, fixed jammed windows. He was not a crook like those guys from town, charging people hundreds of dollars for a few hours' work. He was an honest man, a trustworthy man, and at 86 years old, an old man. He was especially fond of Madame Newman. Even after all these years, she never insisted he call her by her first name like so many did now. She always had a good cup of coffee ready for him when he was done, and a homemade muffin, banana chocolate, his favorite. Another thing forbidden to him by Michelle. Madame Newman was old, almost as old as he was, but she had the most startling blue eyes. She had the most startling blue round eyes and golden gray hair that she knotted into a perfect chignon as though she'd woken up that way. She was always in her garden, which was one of the most efficient and intelligent ones he had seen. She grew enough food in that little plot of land to see her easily through her year and then some. She always paid him in cash and didn't follow him around pretending to understand what he was doing. They never talked much. It was clear Madame preferred the company of her dog and garden to that of humans, but Louis Lachance understood that well, very well indeed. Everyone today talked too much about too little. Ça parle trop pour rien. He sometimes imagined himself arriving at Madame's house in the late afternoon with a bottle of wine, and the two of them watching the sun disappear behind the hill from her back porch, while listening to the afternoon birds singing their diminishing song to the trees. He turned down the unmarked road to her house, passing an overturned garbage can. The bears had obviously gotten to it, the last big feast before hibernation. He would clean that up for her on his way out, if he had time. His window of opportunity with Michelle would open only so far. He turned into Madame's driveway and was surprised not to be greeted by her dog, Kutia, barking from nose to tail so ferociously his whole body spasmed with the effort. The sun was almost hot now, unusual for a late October morning. The leaves were well past their prime, but still glorious and radiant against the deep blue of the sky. He hoisted his tool belt from the back of the truck and stepped carefully down her uneven flagstone walkway to the side door to the kitchen. He could not afford a broken hip at his age. She was usually waiting for him, working on a crossword puzzle, sipping coffee. The paper was on the table, a pencil resting on it next to her coffee cup. The radio was on, a honey-voiced host explaining the piece of music he was about to play. Louis was uncomfortable entering her house without permission, although he knew she wouldn't really mind. He stepped into the kitchen and called her name. Her little gray Subaru hatchback was parked in its usual place. But where was Kutia? They must have gone for a walk. Louis turned to head out of the kitchen, grabbing a muffin on his way. Then he put it back. He did not want her to think he had no manners. And Michelle would be furious. Well, she was going to be furious anyway when she found out he'd been out on a job, another strictly forbidden activity. For a few months, Michelle insisted she tag along if he refused to stop working. He made her help him carry a 100-pound water tank, which she dropped in mid-move, almost killing him and breaking her toe. But she was a stubborn woman, and now he only took jobs in the early morning when she could be counted on to sleep in. He glanced out the kitchen window to the garden, but there was no one there. He was tempted to just walk through it. Even in late October, it was beautiful. The hydrangeas had dried to a delicate pink, the winter berries a brilliant orange. A larch tree glittered gold in the sun. Louis headed back to his truck, feeling more disappointed than he should have. He had to admit that in another life, he and Madame Newman might have been very good friends. Just then, a splash of something bright red interrupted the thought. It was a pile of rags over by the compost bin. And there was the dog, Kutya, lying down next to it, panting in the hot sun. Louis limped closer to investigate. Kutya stretched to his feet, approached Louis, his tail wagging cautiously. It was then that Louis realized the pile of rags was a person. And as he hobbled closer, he saw it was Madame Newman, lying face down in an empty flower bed. He turned her half onto her back and knew immediately that she was dead. Her skin was leathery and cold. Her lips were blue, but not as blue as those open eyes that he was too terrified to close, like they do in the movies. The dog began to whimper very quietly, as though the mourning process could begin now. Louis Lachance, married for 64 years to Michel Dupuis, sat on the dew-damp earth beside Madame Newman and began to cry. So that's the cheerful chapter 1 well, it is a murder mystery. So that was chapter 1, and that sort of launches the book. There's so much to cover, and I know I'm going to talk about 2 books here today. So I would just like to, I thought maybe I'd read one other very short bit. So as the story unfolds, there's many subjects besides the political landscape of Quebec that I wanted to take a look at through these characters. One was certainly the idea of aging, both for Marie and Romeo, but also she's dealing with her mother, whose house has just been sold, the family home, and she has to put her mother into a home. Her mother has sort of the middle stages of Alzheimer's, and part of the book looks at what that feels like for the child who's taking care of the parent. The other themes of the book explores are certainly sort of family dysfunction. I think one could say certainly is a major theme in the book. And I really wanted to look at, because I grew up in the West Island, and it's not to suggest that the West Island is an entirely dysfunctional place, but in the 60s, in the 60s when I grew up there, there was this sort of veneer of perfection, right? From people taking very good care of their lawns and properties, and people had to be just so, it seemed. And as I grew older, and also especially when I talked to some people who I knew from those days, and I got kind of the inside scoop on what went on in a few households, I thought that my sort of odd but loving family was completely weird. But it turns out we were like fabulous compared to a lot of people around us. So so a lot of, of course, sexual abuse that went on that was never talked of. A lot of alcoholism that was also not addressed or talked about. A lot of family dysfunction, but also the idea that the truth needs to be told. A lot of sweeping under the rug of various issues that families had. And so no one ever talked about it. It's an entirely different landscape now, as we all know. We talk much more about these things much more readily. There's much less shame attached to them, much less stigma attached to some of these issues. So I really wanted to look at that in the context of this murder mystery. So it's quite a big landscape, this book, I would say. But again, I wanted to talk about how we must acknowledge the truth and tell the truth before we can begin to heal. It's a very Greek idea from the ancient Greeks, of course, and ancient Greek theater. They're very often, especially in plays like Oedipus Rex, there would be a king who had committed some terrible crime, and until that crime could be exposed and he paid the penalty for it, the city, the town, the polis couldn't heal. So kind of that idea, looking at the West Island, and to some degree, of course, the book is also set up in the Laurentians in St. Lucie des Laurentides, where I live, not too far from here. And so it gave me a wonderful opportunity to spend some time with characters up here. And I thought, should I read one more from The Birds That Stay, or should I switch books? I could read, yeah, I'll read another short one.
Birds of stay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mila. So nice to have friends on Zoom. It's so funny. This is, I have to say, like, you know, this is pretty wacky, don't you think? This is pretty right out there in crazy land. Anyway, so it's just like, it's kind of fantastic. Anyway, thank you again for being so brave as to come out. Okay, so I thought I'd read a little scene between Romeo Le Duc and Tikkun Cousineau. Now, Tikkun is a composite of many people I've known over my many years living up here. I've been up in the Laurentians for 18 years, but I lived in the townships for many years, and I knew quite a few Tikkuns. In Ayers Cliff, in North Hatley, where I lived, in Waterville, in Compton, Lennoxville, Sherbrooke. I lived in so many towns in the Eastern Townships. Anyway, so Tikkun is, I thought I'd read this today because Tikkun comes back in The Dogs of Winter and becomes kind of a bigger character. He's a little more fleshed out. And I have to say, oddly enough, he's become a very popular character, which is interesting considering he has a swastika on his, tattooed on his arm. So I don't know. Anyway, well, we can. He is likable. He's vulnerable. Yeah, but it was surprising to me that people took to this character. So this is Romeo going to interrogate him about what happened about the murder of Anna Newman. Romeo I'm reading halfway through the chapter. Romeo knows Tikkun from high school. They both went to Outremont High together, where Tikkun was a very, the victim of a lot of abuse and it was moved from foster family to foster family. So a theme that I sort of explore a little bit more in the next book. So I'm just gonna jump in here. And I'm gonna put my glasses on for this one. Oh, that's much better. Oh, okay, oh, it's life-changing. Tikkun had moved up to the Laurentians to get out of the city, where he mostly hung out with lowlifes, trying not to drink himself to oblivion, and failing most of the time. He was a small-time break-and-enter guy, mostly to support his dope and booze habit, sometimes to pay off a few favors. It was widely believed by those who care about these things that Tikkun was tight with what remained of the local Hells Angels chapter, but Romeo knew better. To become a full patch Hells Angel, you had to first spend time as a friend, then a hang around, then a prospect. And finally, after many Byzantine initiation tests, you could wear the infamous death head logo on your back. Tikkun was tolerated because of his past experience with the Hells in Montreal, but he was no more and never would be more than an aspiring friend. He was a peripheral guy, always around, always hustling for a few bucks, a fast talker, but a slow thinker. Romeo often wondered about fetal alcohol syndrome where Tikkun was concerned. It was a small miracle the guy was still alive. Tikkun Cousineau was the same age as Romeo, 49, but looked much younger and older at the same time. He was very fit. Romeo noticed bulging triceps and abs through his stained white t-shirt and absurdly developed forearms with fading sleeve tattoos. There was a poorly executed Wonder Womanish version of Hélène, a few names and quotes Romeo couldn't make out, and then a clearly drawn swastika by his elbow. He exuded a kind of explosive, nervous energy, not unlike his dogs. Tikkun's face, however, clearly bore the ravages of booze and way too many drugs. Deeply lined, pockmarked, and a shade of yellowish gray. It was as though his head had been removed from a much older man and attached to an athlete's body. The effect was disconcerting. The house smelled like skunk and body odor. A torn vinyl lazy boy chair faced a wood stove that burned lazily. A coffee table was covered in newspapers, filthy coffee mugs, beer bottles, and several empty frozen food containers. On one wall was a torn poster of a bunch of dogs sitting at a table playing poker. On another, a Confederate flag was tacked up, and just below it, the blue and white Quebec fleur-de-lis. Strange bedfellows, Romeo thought. He tried not to look at the kitchen, which clearly had not been cleaned in weeks, possibly months. The two doors off the living room were hastily closed by Tikkun, who swept some girly magazines off an old armchair and invited Romeo to have a seat. The Chihuahua leaped into Tikkun's lap and directed a low, persistent growl at Romeo. "Tais-toi, Pitoun," said Tikkun tenderly, although he was now holding her jaw shut. The growling continued, muted. He turned to Romeo, raising his chin. P, qu'est-ce que tu veux? Romeo asked him what he knew about Madame Newman. Not much. She's a mystery, her. I know that she'd been living there about 20 years. She don't talk to no one. She makes paintings. She makes good money with that, I think. You know any of her friends? Any family? Tikkun shook his head. Pitun had finally stopped growling. Now she just trembled violently. I never seen her with no one. I mean, she don't even say hello at the dépanneur, see? Tikkun looked at Romeo carefully. Why you want to know about Madame Newman? There's been an accident. She's dead. Romeo watched Tikkun's reaction. Me, I'm not surprised. Old lady living out there all alone. She got no one. Shit happens. Romeo leaned in. Think any of your buddies might know something about this? Huh? No, we got nothing to do with that. An accident, you said? Maybe, maybe not. Romeo removed two $20 bills from his pocket and slid them under the ashtray teeming with cigarette butts and spliffs. He would have to take a shower as soon as he got home. T'es-tu certain? Tikkun hesitated, then offered one nugget. I heard she had money. A lot of money. Les Juifs, eh? People think she keeps money in the house. That's what les Juifs, they do. Romeo raised an eyebrow. Oh, I thought they just ran all the world's banks. And Hollywood. Tikkun nodded. They run the banks for other people to take their money, but they keep their own money in the home. Tikkun leaned in. Ils ont-tu fouillé dans sa maison? Did they take something? Romeo stood up and brushed the dog hair from his pants. If you hear anything, call me. Right away. Compris? As Romeo backed out of Tikkun's driveway, he was uncertain whether Tikkun knew something about the Newman case. Tikkun had a way of twisting the forelock of greasy gray hair over his right eye when he was lying that was entirely absent today. But Romeo was intrigued by the ideas that the locals thought Madame Newman was rich and given to hiding her money in her house. Nothing like a little garden variety anti-Semitism to fuel rumors. Romeo saw it all the time in Quebec, where its roots ran deep and tenaciously. It was definitely worth looking into a little further. So that's the end of Romeo and Tikkun. Okay, so I thought it might be a nice way, to transition just to the Dogs of Winter. And again, so the sort of the overarching themes that I'm really interested in, I realize in a pretty long career as a writer, they kind of repeat themselves. I'm very interested in, and I think this is what draws me to murder mysteries. I've always been interested as a playwright in stories where ordinary people are kind of pushed to extremes. And I don't mean like they're climbing Mount Everest or anything, but where they're pushed to kind of moral extremes is where I'm interested, where they're forced to make a decision that really tests their character. And so murder mystery isn't that big a leap from that because, murder really, and I've often wondered why they sell so well, why most of us who are not touched by these kinds of stories are very drawn to reading murder mysteries. And I think because, of course, it's the most extreme act a human being can commit. And so I think that's why we're pulled in by this. I think that's why we're drawn into the sort of positions that these stories put people in. As a playwright, I've certainly looked at a few of those, and as a, I guess, two-time novelist now, I again wanted to look at truth that remains hidden that must be exposed. The idea of the profound state of denial that many of us live in order, in some ways, to keep going, but how that can be so dangerous. And so, for the Dogs of Winter, I really decided to change it up quite a bit. So the Dogs of Winter, and you'll notice there is a theme, an animal theme here, right? Mm-hmm. Which is definitely going to continue. So the Dogs of Winter, I really wanted to look at, a couple of things. One was our indifference to economic injustice in Montreal in particular regarding homeless people. The kind of casual racism that we sort of live with every day, as I witnessed in regards to homeless people in Montreal, and very specifically right around Dawson College, where the book is set. I also wanted to look at systemic racism as well, and the violence associated with that racism. And I also wanted to look at sexual violence against women. So what I did is I thought of sort of two plot lines and tried to put them together in the Dogs of Winter, and where they intersect, really where Marie and Romeo intersect in the book as well. So I'm giving away a little bit for those who haven't read The Birds That Stay. Marie and Romeo are back because it is a Russell and Leduc mystery #2. So there it is. Tikkun is back in book 2. Tikkun's sister Hélène becomes a kind of offstage character in book 2. I'm trying to think of who else is back in Dogs of Winter. Oh, Nicole Laframboise, who's the detective that works with Romeo, who got pregnant at the end of Birds That Stay and now has a baby. So I wanted to look at those, but I thought maybe I'd read, if it's helpful to read a little bit to just illustrate some things I wanted to talk about. I thought I'd read a little bit from Marie's point of view in the Dogs of Winter. And so one of the things that really made me want to write this book was when teaching at Dawson for 30 years, I cross the street to Alexis Neon Plaza and I go to get my Starbucks coffee, and virtually every time I go to get it, I have to, how about I just read the scene. So I wanted to look at kind of that feeling where that kind of, it's a kind of schizophrenia we all live with, a kind of social schizophrenia where we all live in this world where we know there are people out there who are hungry and don't have shelter and are not safe, and we still manage to drive our cars and have our homes and have whatever we have. And I'm not trying to guilt myself or anyone else, but it is this kind of crazy sort of moral dilemma that we live with day in and day out, and we have to justify it to ourselves in some way, obviously, because we wouldn't put one foot in front of the other if we didn't. And so I wanted to talk about that through Marie's eyes, because I wanted to look at the effects of some of this injustice and racism through the eyes of a white person and how they experience it, because I am a white woman of now 63 years. So I thought let me just find this passage. Yes, so this will be about 4 minutes. I hope that's not too long. Tell me if they're too long. So this is halfway through chapter 7 in the Dogs of Winter. Once the mother house to the Grey Nuns, the imposing 19th century gray stone buildings at the corner of Atwater and Sherbrooke streets were sold to the Quebec government in the early 80s and turned into Dawson College, or Cégep as they are called in Quebec. The convent's chapel was turned into a spectacular library. Few other traces of the nuns remained, but most significantly one did, the Great Dome, and at its apex, the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus in her arms. For some, this overt religious symbol on a public government building should have been removed years ago. For others, it was an important historical landmark that preserved the patrimoine of Quebec. Quebec was once again flirting with laïcité, the complete separation of church and state in terms of religious symbols, including personal apparel items such as the kippa, the crucifix, and the hijab. Many Quebecois supported this in backlash reaction to the past autocracy of the Catholic Church. A minority, usually including minorities, saw this as overt xenophobia, and in the case of the public servants the hijab had applied to, cruel and petty. Within minutes, Marie had passed several students, each wearing one of the controversial religious symbols, as she navigated the main staircase down to the busy atrium of the school. She refused to be pushed and jostled by students, cell phone in one hand, Starbucks coffee in the other, rushing to class. She secretly loved all that teenage hormonal energy. She loved watching the confident girls strutting down the hall, the others who thumb at their phones to avoid eye contact or to look like they're never alone. She loved the gaggles of obstreperous boys, the sheer energy of almost 10,000 students on the move. Marie decided to cross over to the mall by the underground metro level, her preferred route in winter. As she didn't have to actually go outside and wouldn't need her full cold weather regalia. Besides, the aftermath of the snowstorm, snowbanks 3 feet high and sidewalks still not fully cleared, made stepping out into the January air even less appealing. She emerged from the Dawson doors into the actual metro station and passed by the Jehovah's Witness couple flogging their version of Christianity, who still looked so hopeful that she might stop for a little proselytizing. She could already taste that cafe latte with a extra shot of espresso. Maybe she'd treat herself to one of those blueberry oatmeal squares that cost a fortune and about 8,000 calories. Between the metro turnstiles and the shopping center proper, this part of Alexis Neon Mall was known for its high concentration of homeless people. Marie recognized some of them from over the years, and some were more transient, their faces changing every few months. A few of the regulars were there, their empty Starbucks or Tim Hortons coffee cups held aloft, begging for a loonie or a toonie. A couple of them were passed out inside filthy sleeping bags, their few possessions gathered around them in tired plastic bags. Sometimes one would begin to shriek aggressively at a shopper, but for the most part, they were harmless, too drunk or high or sick to be a threat to anyone, except sometimes to each other. Marie always walked quickly past what she called the gauntlet of guilt on the way to her daily coffee. She passed the first guy who wished her bonne journée with a cheery wave and a snaggletooth grin. Another regular, an old woman swaddled in layers of mismatched clothes and a floral babushka on her head, lifted her cup and smiled weakly at Marie, mumbling something in a language Marie didn't understand. She used to stop and ask how they were. She always used to drop some change into their cups, and every now and then she still did. But over time, a feeling of frustrated helplessness had eroded her empathy. She wanted to ask what had happened to them that brought them to this state and this place. She wanted to ask what she could do, but she didn't. Instead, she held her purse a bit tighter and hastened past them, making just enough eye contact to remind herself that they were human too. So that's like the middle chunk of that chapter. So just checking the time. Okay. So that was one of the things that I was very interested in talking about. And also, so I just wanted to say about the Dogs of Winter, because I forgot to read a synopsis of it for those of you who haven't read it, and that's most of you. It opens in a huge snowstorm in Montreal. And as the plot unfolds, a body of a young Inuit woman is found. She's a victim of a hit and run in the Atwater Tunnel. And Romeo's phone number is found in her pocket. So he is called into Montreal by the Montreal police. He, of course, works for the Sûreté de Québec, and of course, you know that there's a great rivalry between the two police forces. Not much fondness there. And so he's called into the city, where Marie is now back teaching a course on whales, on cetacean and human interaction at Dawson College. And so as he investigates this hit and run, they are drawn into, amongst other things, the Montreal police's attitudes towards Indigenous people and these issues of systemic racism. So the villain is really kind of society at large in some ways. And the other story, which that I really wanted to look at, was sexual violence against women. And what happens is one of Marie's students is the victim of a terrible attack. And so those two stories run together. I thought, but I wanted to mention also, well, before I go on to maybe read one more thing, or we could just go to questions, as whatever you decide. I also wanted to say that the book was very much, because people often ask me, you know, what inspired me to write something. And in this book, although I knew I wanted to move the story to Montreal. I was told by my publishers they'd really love it if I did another Laurentian book, because they actually wanted to call it the Laurentian Mysteries. But I didn't want to be held necessarily to this geographical place, because, you know, Montreal is also my city, and I felt that was a bit scary to have to sort of set all these books here. So I moved book 2 to Montreal because I wanted to write about this, for no other reason really. Book 3 is going to be back up here in St. Lucie and environ. But the other reason I wrote The Dogs of Winter is when I was doing my research about why is it that 40% of homeless people in and around Atwater Market and Cabot Square are Inuit, that's 40%. I was in the course of that, a couple of stories popped up, and one was, two of these stories were in August of 2017. Two young Inuit women from Nunavik in northern Quebec were found hanged. And both were deemed suicides. But there were a lot of questions regarding these young women. And certainly one many people suspected was a homicide, definitely. And the other was a little more ambiguous, but both were quite suspicious deaths. And neither death homicide was investigated by the Montreal police. And then I found a pattern where women of, Inuit women who were victims of sexual violence or murdered, as we know from, of course, across Canada, our terrible history, it was simply not investigated. And why I was particularly drawn to this story was at the time my daughter was the exact same age as these two young women, 27. And I was horrified that these two young women were dead and no one was looking into this. And I had a daughter who had all the privileges of, growing up nice middle class in Montreal and got to live her life and look forward to her future. And so that was the other reason that really prompted me to write this book. I really wanted to dig into this. So in a way, The Birds That Stay, to some degree, there's that old adage, write what you know. The Birds That Stay, to some degree, is what I know. A lot of those characters are composites of many people over the years and friends and family and so forth, and some complete inventions, of course. But The Dogs of Winter is another adage, don't write what you know, write what you want to understand. And I really wanted to understand some things that I investigated in The Dogs of Winter. Now, I am in no way suggesting I'm an expert on any of this. The more and I'm sure you've all done this, the more you read, the more you realize I know nothing about this. So it just opened up a whole door for me to just enter and read more about especially Inuit history and treatment of Inuit people in Canada, Indigenous people. It's kind of remarkable to me, actually, how little information there is out there. I had to dig pretty deep to find out some of this stuff, and also why our children aren't taught this in school starting in kindergarten. I just don't understand. So that would go a long way towards addressing some of these issues. So that was that. Should I just take some questions? It's 10 to 2. So I can read some more or answer questions, whatever is your preference. Or talk some more, whatever you like. The title, The Dogs of Winter? Yeah, sure. There's The Birds That Stay. So maybe I'll do that one first, and then the second one, because so The Birds That Stay was the title of the book from the get-go. I knew the title before I had written the book, because I'm a bird watcher, and I'm a little bit in love, and I'm sure you are too, with all the birds that stay. So chickadees, juncos, nuthatches, blue jays, crows, woodpeckers, right? So they became a metaphor for a whole bunch of things. One was just the people who kind of stick it out here in the winter, who've stayed in Quebec and make lives here, even though, it's not the easiest place to live. It was also meant to be a metaphor for the people who stayed after the election of the Parti Québécois, especially where I grew up in the West Island. I honestly, I have to say 98% of the people I knew out there went west to Toronto and further. I really literally know almost no one from my elementary school that stayed. I mean, I know them, through the wonders of Zoom. I've stayed in touch, and Facebook. It also became a metaphor for the people who sort of stick it out as well. Like Marie, for example, taking care of her mom. She has two sisters. One has died, sadly, but the other sister lives in Calgary and, talks a lot about coming home to take care of mom and how she misses mom and she really wishes she would be home and help. But in the end, it's Marie who does the work. And I've noticed there's the people who do the work and the people who don't. And the people who do the work are the birds that stay, in my mind. The Dogs of Winter, I knew that dogs feature prominently in this book, and I can't really talk more about it because can't talk more about that. I'm a dog lover. I have had many dogs. I've never the only time I haven't had a dog since I was 3 years old was 9 months of my life. Oh, wow. Yeah. So The Dogs of Winter, so on a literal level, it's just, dogs are important to the book. They're very much part of the main plot. as is the brutality and beauty of a Montreal winter. That's very much part of the story as well. The other idea was the dogs of winter. Marie references it in the book where she sees a couple of huskies in her neighborhood who are leashed, and what they want to do is run, but they're kind of held back by their owner. And that becomes kind of a metaphor for people who are also misplaced in the city. People who really belong in the winter, but who don't belong in this urban landscape of Montreal. And I see a lot of dogs that are like that, that really, like border collies, for example, that need to be running the fields, and they're held on leashes in Montreal. So that's really it. And of course, I like the idea of an animal in every title. I guess it's a gimmick. And because I like all animals, domestic and wild. So I don't know what the next book features whales quite prominently, but I don't know. Yeah. So are there other questions? Yeah.
How did your sales, because that was something that you addressed at the beginning about you turned to a murder mystery to ensure sale?
Yeah. Are you asking me about my sales?
Yes, I'm just wondering.
Well, the book sold. No, it did okay. I mean, I think for a first-time Canadian book, it did pretty well. I wish it sold way more. And you know, it's just, there's a lot of, I mean, it's just unbelievable how many books there are out there on the market. Like every time I feel sort of indignant that, you know, every person in Canada doesn't own my book, and you know, it's not in the New York Times notable books of which just came out today. I realized there's so many books that are published. So it did, according to my publishers, it was very respectable. I'm hoping with the second book, they keep telling me sells the first. And, you know, right now, to be honest, it's not the easiest time to launch a book. It's kind of laughable, to be honest, but I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm so glad to be doing a live event. I'm so Zoom, although I love everybody on Zoom. So hopefully it'll do better. I mean, it's tough. I have a small publisher, so they're mighty, but their reach is small. So it would be, you know, great if it was made into a Netflix series. So
you should be able to, you know, we read books to discover other areas. Okay, so whether it's a topic, whether it's a physical location, like I know when I read, I love it when the author can put me in that place.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Now you're putting somebody in the heart of us. So it seems to me it would be wonderful for a reader outside. I mean, it's great to read our own, you know,
right,
and it's lovely to relate, but it must be even better if you're reading it from that perspective, learning about us.
Yeah, so I don't know if people in Zoom can hear here, but okay, but just this woman was talking about why people would like to read my books or be part of them or be a Netflix series, because it's an exotic locale to not people around here. I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. And I watch a fair amount of Netflix. I watch a lot of Scandinavian noir because I like that. I like the dark stuff. I do. I sometimes will watch a series that isn't actually that good, just for the locale, just to, you know, watch something in Germany or Poland or India or something, and just so I can hear the language too. I love the subtitles and listening to the original language. So yeah, if anybody has any, you know, connections, let me know. I did pitch The Birds That Stayed in Netflix, and apparently 40,000 other Canadians had the same idea. So I didn't get a series, go figure. So yeah, yeah. Did you want to ask a Zoom question?
I have a comment and a question. I live at the corner of Atwater and Sherbrooke. So I know that area extremely well, and I know the number of Inuit homeless that are there. So I'm going to be extremely interested to read your conclusions when you did your research about the homeless, and in particular about the Inuit, mostly women, I think. Is that correct? They're mostly women?
Yes. Well, in my book, I'm only really talking about women. I would be resistant to the word conclusions. Just personally, I would say that I probably asked a lot of questions and opened the door to conversation more. You know, I don't know that I offer any conclusions, to be honest, But I think that certainly Marie, through the eyes of Marie, she's kind of exposed to, let's just say her attitude is given an adjustment, I would say, without giving any more away. So thank you for that. So you know of what I speak, you live right there.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Great, good. Let me know what you think. I have a website and you can find it and send me a message.
Is it in the book?
Pardon me? It's not, because I just got it. So, but if you, my email's on the website, it's just www.annlambertbooks.com. And shoot me an email and I will answer. I'm very prompt.
Okay.
Great.
I have a question that is a little bit connected to that. I was wondering, when you're writing about a place, whether it's the Laurentians or the area around Dawson College, whom do you feel more of an obligation for, or what sort of reader are you thinking about? The sort of reader who knows the area, as this reader does, she lives right there, the sort of reader who knows the area, or the sort of reader who knows nothing at all about the area?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. I would say both. I really, for the people who know the area, I don't know what getting it right means either. It's getting right for me, right? What I see. I really want to get the area right. I really want to hit the kind of things that people will recognize and understand and hopefully appreciate on a kind of deeper level, though. But I also want to create that world for people who don't come from here at all, like, and who know nothing about Montreal or Quebec or the Laurentians. And I hope I do that reasonably well. So both, absolutely. But I really like when people from here will say it's such a pleasure to read something set in our hometown or in our area, because, one of the things, and I don't mean to sound the way this sounds, but Canadians don't really read their own. And that's one of the things, to answer your question, Canadians don't read their own. It's quite shocking. But I'll tell you who does read their own: French Quebecois. They do. I'll rephrase that. Anglo-Canadians don't read their own, generally speaking. And Quebecois do, very much so. So if anyone knows of a French publisher who'd like to publish these books in French, because I've had a lot of requests for that, let me know.
All right.
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you for the question. These are great questions. Yeah.
And there's somebody that's asking, when you write in French, if you have translation
Uh,
at the bottom
Oh,
of the page.
I see. When I write in French in the book, do I translate the French in the book? I think I translate most of it. So the French in the book is really important to me. It's just really important to me, especially up here. I have had some people from other parts of Canada and the United States write to me and say, you need a glossary. I don't understand this French. I really think if you're paying attention, I think there's very few things in the books that I don't then either immediately translate or you can figure out from context.
Yes.
But I did have someone recently complain about the French in The Dogs of Winter from Montreal.
Wow.
That she never really learned French and didn't like the French, and I should have a glossary and translate everything. So I don't know. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to be insensitive to people who feel like, they're taken out of the story if there's too much French, but I feel like I was pretty careful with that. It's also the audiobooks. Both books are audiobooks recorded. I recorded them both this summer. And I think it's harder for people with the audiobooks. They're not used to the French. Yeah. Yes, there's a lot of questions in this room. So, okay. Okay. Did you? Yeah.
But just to get back to the locale of the books, whether in real place.
Yeah.
But they're writing it as fictional name. And it's like, I like it. This is a place you can look it up on the map. There's
Yeah.
It makes it more grounded, I think, in the story. And makes the story more believable.
Okay.
That was my.
Okay. So a comment about it being
I really like that.
really appreciating that the town of St. Lucie de Laurentides is an actual real town. And Montreal's a real place. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, of course, a trope of all murder mysteries that they create towns. And there's obviously a very famous Quebec writer who has her story set in Three Pines, which is, I think, a thinly veiled Knowlton. So that's, you know, that's great. And I've thought about those books that have a fictional town, and, you know, I think there's something very comforting about those towns. I think people really like the idea of these characters who live in those towns, and they're very knowable over many, many books. And there, you know, there's a kind of, yeah, I think comfort to a town knowing that there's a place somewhere like that in the world, even though a lot of murders happen there. So you know, I never even thought of making up a town. I just knew it was going to be, I mean, the book isn't set so much in St. Lucie. It's sort of set around Val-David, St. Agathe a little bit, up in La Belle, and oh, I can't say that. It's a plot thing. So, but I really wanted to capture how I saw the Laurentians. And I had my sister-in-law actually told me, she said, oh, people are going to think Quebec's a terrible place to live based on this book. Like, you know, description of the construction and the guys standing around over their shovels, you know, 10 of them watching the hole. And, but it's true. I said, but it's true. You know, it's true. I mean, I think there's great affection for Quebec in the book. I mean, I love my home. But I think at least I'm looking at it pretty straight on, pretty honestly. So.
Hollywood attitude that they film something in Toronto and then they try to make it look like it's Chicago.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
It's a marketing.
Yes.
I think at the beginning you mentioned Nazis coming into Canada, the rat line. That's brand new for me.
Oh.
Could you just talk about that a bit?
Yes, sure. So after World War II, many Nazis escaped, as you know, some high-ranking ones and some lower-ranking ones, but many also just got reinserted into German and society in parts of Eastern Europe. Although I know the German government banned them from teaching. There were certain occupations former Nazis couldn't do, teaching being one of them. But many got out. And I had always thought that they all went to Brazil and Argentina. You know, there's an entire part of Argentina called Bariloche, which is like a German or a, you know, kind of a Austrian village that's been created in Argentina in this sort of ski area. It's just astonishing, where a lot of former Nazis, high-ranking Nazis went. Turns out our country took in quite a few too. And we did that in cahoots with the United States. So what happened was, as soon as the war ended, they were looking for people who were not anti-Nazi, but anti-communist. So a lot of these Nazis were virulently anti-communist. Many spoke several languages, right? So very helpful. And many were believed to be, in the Cold War that ensued after World War II, many were believed to be, would be very loyal, helpful, politically appropriate new citizens. So thousands were brought into Canada. And it was called the Rat Line. Yeah, I me neither. I didn't know anything about it. And I started exploring that because of a plot, because where one of my characters took me, and just couldn't, you know, of course I couldn't stop reading. I don't know everything there is to know about it, but I did find out quite a bit about it, and it was, you know, just it was shocking. And partly it was because, you know, every now and then over the years a Nazi would pop up. Like there was one in oh, it's gone, a beekeeper in, where is he now? Somewhere in, like near Montreal. Can't remember the town, just blanked. Near Howick. And another guy was a famous restaurateur in Toronto. Another one was an art dealer in Toronto. Like, you know, and these were people who had gone on to be like upstanding members of their community, or very peaceable occupations. And once again, it's that it's that whole disconnect between, you know, on the one hand, this person is monstrous, right? But on the other hand, has this whole other life of living a quiet life and being a good grandfather to a bunch of grandkids in Canada and being sort of an ideal citizen. And that's always, I think that's a very appealing, you know, idea to many of us, because I think we're very drawn to that sort of, you know, that veneer of civilization, that monster who remains hidden.
The prosecution for war crimes were those people who come in illegally? Or
no, they came in legally, completely given new identities, completely new identity. Oh no, they came in completely legally, legitimately through the Canadian government. What happened was when the shit hit the fan, so to speak, later on, they tried to deport many of them. And many of them did get deported. Some, they just hung it up in court for so long, they died. Most of them are dead now. But no, the Canadian government, I think it was in the late 80s, had to change their whole approach to it because whatever they were doing wasn't working. There was something, I think it was the Deschênes, I'm sorry, it's been a while since I read all this. It was the Deschênes Commission that researched the rat line and revealed all this. So yeah, it's a really sordid part of our history. One of several. Are there other questions from, yes?
Have you got any feedback from the Francophone community with respect to the first book?
Yes, I do. I have, I'm from my cousins, my Francophone cousins. Everybody loves this book. And I was a little worried, I thought, oh, I wonder if a Francophone will not appreciate some of the depictions or the anti-Semitism that's alluded to and remains a theme in the book. And a lot of them, like you, didn't know anything about the rat line to Canada. And a lot of them, to be honest, a lot of them who are my age, say, would recall being told certain things as young Roman Catholics, which I won't share here, and sort of saying, oh my goodness, yes, we were educated in a very shocking way in Quebec in the 1960s and 70s. It's interesting, I have a very good friend, Francophone friend down my road in St. Lucie who is my champion. She's a French lit professor at Saint Jerome. Cégep in Saint Jerome, and she loves both books. But she was the only person I know who took exception was my Anglo neighbor down the road. He did not like the depiction of certain aspects of Quebec in the book.
Well, that was my impression reading the first one. I was at the Burlington Club, and all I asked you.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I remember. Yeah.
It shines an unfavorable light on certain aspects of Quebec life. In most respects, correctly, but I could imagine Francophones, you know how they're so defensive. Somebody criticizes Quebec culture. I was thought, well, I wonder how that would be received by Francophones.
So far, so good. I mean, it would be great to get the book translated and then see. I guess that would be the litmus test, right? To get the book translated and see if it sells and see if it goes. Yes.
Yeah, it was just a comment. I read Dogs of Winter and I'm partway through your other book. And I really have to admire how you marry so many different complexities of Quebec culture. Both, you've got the two languages, you've got the historical perspectives, you've got these social issues, you've got relationship issues. And I'm in awe, actually, of how well you have accomplished that. Plus being a woman of relative saying vintage.
An old fart.
Yeah, there you go. How enjoyable it is just to read about things that I also have enjoyed and lived. I mean, I went to the Cock and Ball a few times way back when, remember? And just that whole area, and just thinking, oh my God, it's so fun to read about things that and I have a good chuckle as well as also being brought aware of the social issues that you've delved into. And I can't get over if you just started 3 or 4 years ago, 3 years ago writing?
Mm-hmm. Not writing novels.
Writing novels like this.
Yeah.
That your research, I would have thought you would get lost in your research and it would take you so much longer to accomplish what you've accomplished. And what I think is a relatively short space of time.
Thank you. That was, by the way, for anybody on Zoom, that was a nice comment. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things you could research, like especially Dogs of Winter. I could spend years reading about these issues. I mean, that's why I said, I don't know. I think it was somebody on the Zoom said, conclusions. There's no conclusion. I am in no way equipped to offer conclusions about anything. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not Inuit. I'm not Indigenous, so I cannot go there. I can only sort of engage with these issues through my characters. The characters are confronted with certain things, like in the passage I read to you, that they have to face, and they can only engage in that way. They can't. These in the end are murder mysteries. They're not sociological books. They're not polemics. They're not histories. But I am drawn to murder mysteries that do set us in a political and cultural background. That's what I love to read. So I figured I'll just write the kind of book that I like to read, because that's what I like to do. So for the next book, you know, certainly I'm going to be looking at climate change and the animal rights movement. That's what's coming up in book 3. Yes. Anyway, quite
You have
looking.
books for sale, Sarah?
I do.
Good.
I do. So should we say goodbye to anybody on Zoom or talk to anybody on Zoom or? Oh, see, somebody's asking if I have French and English. Do you have
Yes,
translation at
that's
the
what
bottom
I
of the page? Yeah.
That's what I read, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today on Zoom. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
It was fantastic. Thank you very much. It was most entertaining, Ms. Lambert. And,
Thank you,
thank
Violet
you very
Shanks,
much
my
for
friend from
hosting.
high school. Thank you so much. Nothing
you
like
very
stacking
much.
the audience.
It's great to get to know you. Where
Yes.
can you buy the book?
Please do, and you know, the holidays are coming, everyone, so please buy one for yourself and a friend, and if you could post a review on Goodreads,
How much is your book?
Amazon. They're 20.
Not very expensive.
Not very expensive, very cheap. Very, very cheap. Very cheap books.
We got it on Indigo or Amazon.
Yeah, they're cheap. And there's audiobooks too that for sale if you don't care for reading. You prefer to listen.
No,
And
And by
no.
the way, I like the humor in your book.
Thank you for
They're
saying
very
that.
funny. Yeah, they're funny. We laugh and it's great.
Thank you for saying that, because when I describe them, they sound so humorless and awful.
Well,
So they're not humorless and awful.
Oh, no, no,
we
they're
like
funny.
we like the mating of the bees.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for joining us on Zoom. Lovely to see you all.
Okay. Well,
Thank you, Violet Shanks.
When did you teach?
Thank you.
Dawson,
Pardon me?
what years were you?